Blood streamed down Leif's temple as the elder's guards dragged him forward, his wrists bound tightly with rough ropes that bit into his skin. The crowd formed a half-circle, faces twisted with anger beneath the flickering torchlight. At the center stood Elder Thorvald, pointing his ornate staff at him, while Freya kept her gaze fixed on the ground, silent tears tracing her pale cheeks. "For defiling our daughter and dishonoring the gods during the sacred moon ritual, you will pay with your freedom," the elder thundered. In that moment, Leif knew his life would never be the same. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a world where love and duty collide beneath the cold northern skies. Our channel is just beginning, and every subscription means the world to us, helping these stories come alive and reach more listeners. If you enjoy the tale, please consider subscribing and sharing where you're watching from. Your support keeps the fire burning strong. The cold air bit sharply as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale gray hue across the scattered cabins of Ravenholm. Inside one modest dwelling, a small plume of smoke lazily rose from a chimney, mixing with the crisp morning mist that clung to the silent woods beyond. The village was still awakening, but within the modest home, a young man stirred from restless sleep. Leif Ragnarsson's breath came steady but shallow, his chest rising beneath a worn, threadbare blanket. The chill of the night still lingered in the cramped space, the warmth of the dying embers long faded from last night's fire. His heavy eyelids fluttered open to a dim room where the early light barely touched the rough-hewn wooden walls. The scent of damp earth and smoke filled the air, mingling with a faint trace of iron and sweat from yesterday's labor. A faint groan escaped him as he stretched stiff limbs, the ache of muscles called upon too often, reminding him of another day's toil ahead. At 19 winters, life was already marked by the hardships of life in Ravenholm. The son of a once renowned blacksmith, now lost to the sea on an ill-fated voyage, he bore the weight of legacy heavy upon his shoulders. His broad frame, shaped by years of hammering molten metal and hauling timber, was draped in a dark woolen tunic, threadbare at the edges but sturdy. His brown hair, shoulder-length and usually tied in a loose knot, fell in tangled strands across his forehead, a small reminder of nights spent wrestling sleep away. On his neck hung a simple amulet, a carved symbol of Tyr, the god of courage and justice, a talisman passed down from his father. The cabin smelled of ash and cold stone floors, the sparse furnishings telling of solitude and necessity rather than comfort. A wooden stool sat near the hearth, its surface scarred from years of use, and a simple bed of straw lay pressed into the corner. Outside, the village stirred softly. The distant clatter of wooden buckets, the murmured voices of women drawing water from the shared well, the occasional bark of a dog breaking the morning stillness. Leif swung his legs over the side of the bed, the rough wool of his trousers brushing against his calves. His bare feet met the cold floor, sending a shiver through his body. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and wet moss from the surrounding forest. He pulled his matted hair back into the familiar knot, the motion steadying him as he rose to stoke the dying embers of the hearth. The fire cracked to life, sending a warm glow that pushed back the shadows and filled the cabin with flickering amber light. Outside, the sky bled from gray to pale blue, the sun's ascent slow but certain. The village was a patchwork of wooden huts and smoke, nestled beneath towering pines and the looming silhouette of distant mountains. The air was still cool, but the promise of summer warmed the earth beneath the frost-kissed grass. Birds stirred in the branches, their songs tentative but growing with the light. Leif dressed in the clothes he had worn for days, the wool heavy and slightly stiff from sweat and work. He wrapped himself in the wolfskin cloak his father had gifted him, a symbol of strength and protection. The fur was coarse, yet familiar against his skin, a reminder of the man who had taught him the forge's secrets before fate stole him away. The forge was the heart of Ravnholm, a place where fire and iron met to shape the tools of survival. From his earliest years, Leif had found solace in its heat and fury, the rhythm of hammer on anvil, a language he understood deeply. The forge belonged to Gunnar, the village's chief smith, a man of gruff demeanor and a presence as solid as the iron he shaped. Gunnar's workshop sat on the village edge, its walls blackened by smoke and streaked with the orange glow of molten metal. As Leif stepped outside, the village was alive with murmurs and movement. Fishermen readied their boats for the morning's haul, their weathered hands knotting ropes and checking nets. Women and children moved between cabins, carrying baskets woven from reeds, the scent of fresh bread wafting from communal ovens. The sun's rays caught the dew on the grass, turning each blade into a prism of light. Erik Halvardsson, a young fisherman with sun-bleached hair and a grin that often masked deeper worries, greeted Leif with a nod as they crossed paths near the well. The salt tang of the sea clung to Erik like a second skin, and his keen blue eyes scanned the horizon as if expecting trouble. His presence was a reminder of the bonds of friendship that tethered Leif beyond his solitude, voices in the midst of the village's daily ritual. Leif's footsteps carried him to the forge, the rhythmic pounding of hammer against steel already echoing through the air. Gunnar's massive form was hunched over an anvil, sweat streaked across his reddened skin, his fiery hair catching the early light. The workshop smelled of smoke, hot metal, and sweat, a pungent but familiar scent that stirred something fierce within Leif. "Morning comes early for you these days," Gunnar grunted without looking up, his voice rough but carrying a hint of approval. Leif nodded, setting down the bundle of tools he had gathered. His hands, rough and calloused, flexed unconsciously. The elder's orders must be met. The moon ritual needs the blades. Gunnar grunted again, tapping the anvil with a hammer. "Aye, and the elder's daughter will dance with those blades by her side. You're crafting more than weapons, boy." The weight of those words settled on Leif's shoulders, heavier than the iron he shaped. The moon ritual was sacred, a time when the village sought favor from the gods. The blades were not mere tools of war or hunting, but symbols of fertility, protection, and the unyielding bond between the people and their deities. As the morning sun climbed higher, the forge became a furnace, the air thick with heat and the sharp scent of molten metal. Leif lost himself in the work, hammering, folding, quenching, each movement precise, each strike deliberate. Sweat beaded on his brow and dripped into the fire's glow, the forge's song a harsh melody that echoed the pounding of his heart. He thought of Freya often in these moments, the elder's daughter, radiant and distant as the summer sun. Her golden hair and clear blue eyes haunted his thoughts, like a flame both inviting and perilous. She was a figure of light in a hard world, yet also a symbol of the walls that divided them. Her status high, his low, their fates seemingly sealed by tradition and expectation. During a brief pause, Leif wiped soot from his face, his fingers tracing the lines of runes neatly carved into the haft of a ceremonial dagger. His grandfather had taught him the ancient meanings: protection, fertility, courage, symbols that reached back to a time when the gods walked closer to men and whispered their secrets in the rustling of leaves and the crash of waves. The village bell tolled midday, its low clang rolling over the rooftops like a call to assembly. Leif sat on a rough bench, breaking his bread and cheese in silence. The simple meal tasted faintly of the earth and fields, grounding him in the reality of the day. Erik joined him then, settling beside him with a casual ease. "You heard the talk?" he asked, voice low. "The elder plans to bind Freya to Hakon Olafsson." The name fell like a stone in Leif's stomach. Hakon, the cruel, battle-hardened son of a neighboring jarl, a man whose reputation was forged in violence and fear. Leif's lips tightened. It cannot be. Freya would never accept. Eric shrugged, the lines around his eyes deepening. Since when did that matter? The elders' plans are not for love, but power. Their conversation drifted as Leif's thoughts spun wildly. The tender moments he imagined with Freya were clouded now with the looming shadow of Hakon's presence. The future that had seemed possible now slipped away like smoke on the wind. The forge called him back to its demands, and Leif returned to his work. The metal responded to his touch, a language older than words, and in the heat and hammering he found a fleeting escape from the storm gathering over his heart. As evening approached, the village began to prepare for the moon ritual. Torches were gathered, flowers woven into garlands, and white linen dresses laid out. The air was thick with anticipation, and the scent of herbs and burning wood. Leif watched from the shadows as Freya moved among the preparations, her movements graceful, yet burdened with a quiet sadness. Their eyes met briefly, a spark of recognition flaring before she glanced away, the weight of duty pressing heavily upon her. The night promised more than ceremony. It held the fragile hope of defiance, love, and the price that would be exacted when the bonds of tradition clashed with the longings of the heart. The forest beyond the clearing was dense, shadows pooling beneath towering pines as moonlight filtered through the branches in silver shards. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine resin, cool and sharp against Leif's skin. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a thunderclap against the quiet night. The taste of fear and desire mingled bitterly on his tongue. He had followed Freya when she slipped away from the circle of torches, drawn by the fragile thread of hope that still clung to them both. Now, as he stepped cautiously between trees, the sounds of the ritual faded behind him. The faint murmur of voices, the crackle of burning wood, the distant cadence of drums, and all that remained was the stillness of the forest and the weight of what might come. Ahead, a faint shimmer caught his eye, the faint glow of a small body huddled beneath a gnarled tree root. The figure was a child, a boy, no older than 7 or 8 winters, his face streaked with dirt and tears, his small frame trembling beneath a threadbare cloak. His wide eyes, reflecting the moonlight, locked onto Leif's with a mixture of pleading and fear. The boy's name was Svend, though Leif had not known this until moments before, when the whispers of passing villagers had reached his ears. Svend was the youngest son of a woman who had long fallen ill, a woman shunned by the village for reasons both whispered and cruel. The boy had been left behind, forgotten in the chaos of preparations for the ritual, his fate uncertain in a world that showed little mercy to the weak. Leif's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, torn between the duty he owed to the village and the fierce, sudden surge of protectiveness that clenched his chest.
The ritual awaited, the eyes of the tribe and the gods themselves fixed upon the night's sacrifice to tradition and honor. But here, in the shadows of the forest, was a child abandoned, a life fragile and trembling. He hesitated, fingers tightening involuntarily around the wolfskin cloak that draped his shoulders. Could he risk bringing this boy back into the heart of the village? Would the elders see him as a threat, or worse, a burden? The punishments for breaking with custom were harsh, and his own future too uncertain. Soon to be chained to servitude, bound by the debts he had yet to pay. Yet the child's eyes held no accusation, only desperate hope. Sven's small hands reached toward him, trembling, searching for a touch of kindness. Leif knelt slowly, mindful of every sound in the still night. The boy flinched, but did not retreat. "It's all right," Leif whispered, voice rough with emotion. "You're not alone." For a moment the cold air seemed to still, the forest holding its breath as fragile trust wove itself between them. Leif's heart ached with a tenderness he had not expected, threading through the hard edges of his own fear. He gently lifted the boy into his arms, feeling the fragile weight pressed against his chest. Sven's body was trembling, but as Leif wrapped his cloak tighter around him, a flicker of warmth kindled beneath the surface of that fear. The decision was as clear as the moon above, though the path ahead was clouded with peril. To leave the boy to whatever fate awaited was unthinkable. But to bring him back was to invite suspicion and wrath, not only from the elder, but from the entire village. Leif rose, his resolve hardening like the steel he forged. Duty to his people had always been paramount, but now a new truth burned within him, that compassion, even in the harshest of times, was a strength of its own. He moved swiftly, yet cautiously, retracing his steps toward the clearing. The distant sounds grew louder again, the chanting, the flutes, the rustling of linen dresses. The village was alive with expectation, but Leif's mind was elsewhere, caught between love, loyalty, and the fragile promise of mercy. As he neared the edge of the light, a sharp movement froze his blood. From the shadows emerged a figure, Hakon Olafsson, his dark eyes gleaming with suspicion and malice. His heavy cloak billowed behind him, and the glint of his adaga caught the torchlight like a predator's glint. Hakon's gaze shifted swiftly, landing on the small bundle in Leif's arms. The cruel smile that twisted his lips was like a blade to Leif's chest. "What have you there, blacksmith?" Hakon's voice was low, dangerous. "A stray? A burden? Or perhaps another secret you hope to hide?" Leif squared his shoulders, his grip tightening protectively around Sven. "He is no burden," he said firmly. "He is a child, left alone in the forest." Hakon stepped forward, the air thickening with the promise of violence. "You risk more than you know, boy."
Harboring weakness during the moon ritual is no small offense. The elder will hear of this. Leif's mind raced, but his voice was steady. "I will answer for my actions, but I will not abandon an innocent." The tense silence stretched between them, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows like fingers reaching for the boy's fate. Hakon's eyes narrowed, calculating. Then, with a snarl, he turned away, his cloak swirling like smoke as he vanished back into the darkness. Leif exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and dread twisting within him. He glanced down at Sven, who clung to him with a fragile hope that seemed to grow stronger with each heartbeat. Returning to the clearing would mean stepping into the storm, into the harsh judgments of the elder and the village. But it was a risk Leif accepted without hesitation. For love was not only the bond between man and woman, it was the courage to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. The night deepened, and as the drums resumed their steady rhythm, Leif knew that whatever awaited him, his path was now intertwined with the fate of this boy, and with the fragile hope that one day freedom and love might be more than just distant dreams beneath the cold northern skies. Leif moved swiftly through the darkened forest, the weight of the small boy pressing against his chest. The boy's frail body trembled with cold and fear, but there was a subtle resilience in the set of his jaw, a quiet alertness in his wide eyes. The moon hung high above, casting a pale light that filtered through the branches, painting the path ahead with silver shadows. Each step Leif took was measured, careful not to make noise that might draw unwanted attention. His own heart pounded fiercely, the adrenaline from the confrontation with Hakon still lingering like embers beneath his skin. Yet, amidst the chaos within him, a steady calm had settled over his resolve. This child, Svend, as he had learned from whispered villagers, was now under his protection. That simple truth anchored him. The village lay ahead, its wooden cabins clustered around the central square like silent sentinels. Life's feet carried him toward his own modest dwelling on the outskirts, where the forge's smoke curled faintly into the night sky. The others would be asleep by now, or at least resting after the long day's labor and ritual. This clandestine return felt like stepping into a world apart, one where silence was both shield and threat. Inside the cabin, the lingering chill wrapped around life like a shroud. The fire had long since died, leaving only cold ashes and scattered embers. He set the boy down gently on the rough wooden floor, careful not to jar him. Sven's eyes traced the room with wary curiosity, absorbing the unfamiliar shadows and shapes. Life moved to the hearth, striking flint against stone until a spark caught the dry tinder.
The dull glow grew into a flickering flame, casting warmth and light that seemed to draw the boy closer. Sven shivered, the tightness in his thin clothes evident beneath the cloak Leif had wrapped around him. Without a word, Leif removed his wolfskin cloak and draped it over the boy's shoulders. The coarse fur was a stark contrast to the threadbare fabric beneath, but it offered a tangible comfort, a shield against the biting cold. Sven's small fingers grasped the edge of the cloak, holding it as if it were a lifeline. Leif seated himself on a low stool, watching the boy with a mix of tenderness and quiet concern. The firelight danced across Sven's face, revealing a faint smudge of dirt on his cheek and a pale scar that ran just above his left eyebrow, a thin, jagged line that told of past hardships. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was a space where trust began to take root, fragile but real. Finally, Leif broke the quiet. "What is your name?" His voice was gentle, carrying no judgment. Sven's eyes flicked up, meeting Leif's gaze. There was hesitation, but the boy's lips parted in a whisper. "Svend." "Where are you from, Svend?" Leif asked, careful not to push too hard. The boy's gaze dropped to the floor, fingers nervously twisting a worn leather cord tied around his wrist. "My mother, she is sick. They say she is cursed." Leif nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. In their world, sickness was often met with suspicion, fear. Those marked by misfortune were sometimes shunned, left to fend for themselves. The scars on Sven's skin, the dirt in his hair, the weariness behind his young eyes, all spoke of a life hard-lived beyond the warmth of hearth and home. Leif reached into a small wooden chest by the wall, lifting out a piece of coarse bread and a chunk of aged cheese. He tore the bread into small pieces and offered it to Sven, who accepted hesitantly at first, then with increasing eagerness. The boy ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a rare treasure. As Sven ate, Leif fetched a small bowl of warm water and a linen cloth. He knelt beside the boy, gently wiping the grime from his face and hands. The touch was careful, respectful, a silent promise that here, in this space, he would be safe. In the flickering firelight, Sven's eyes softened. For the first time that night, a faint smile touched his lips, fleeting but genuine. The boy's small hand reached out, resting briefly on Leif's rough fingers, a simple gesture, but one heavy with meaning. Leif's own heart tightened. This was no longer just a burden or a risk. It was a bond, a silent vow born of necessity and hope. Hours slipped by as the fire crackled softly, the night deepening outside. Leif shared what little he had, some dried fish, a flask of clear water, offering sustenance and warmth. In return, Sven spoke in halting words, revealing fragments of his life. A village far beyond the fjords, a mother who gathered herbs and whispered prayers to old gods, a name spoken in hushed tones with both love and fear. Leif listened, absorbing each detail, every whispered word weaving a tapestry of a childhood marked by hardship but also resilience. The boy's small hands moved restlessly, but with purpose, tracing invisible patterns in the air as if weaving stories. At one point, Sven pulled a small carved wooden figure from his pocket, a crude representation of a raven, wings outstretched. He turned it over in his hands, eyes brightening with a flicker of pride. Leif recognized the symbol immediately. The raven was sacred to Odin, a sign of wisdom and protection. "That is a good sign," Leif said quietly. "Odin watches over those who journey the hardest paths." Sven nodded solemnly, clutching the figure tightly, as if drawing strength from it. As the night deepened, Leif fetched a worn woolen blanket, wrapping it around the boy's slender frame. The warmth seeped into Sven's chilled bones, coaxing a peaceful stillness. The boy's eyelids grew heavy, and finally he curled up on the floor, resting his head against Leif's boot. Leif sat back against the wall, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy cloak. His thoughts drifted to Freya and the impossible choices that awaited. The weight of his own fate pressed hard, but in this quiet moment the fragile trust between him and the boy was a balm, an ember of hope flickering against the darkness. Outside, the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon, softening the edges of night. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting a gentle glow over two figures bound by circumstance and the unspoken promise of protection. Leif's eyes closed briefly, the silence wrapping around him like a shield. In the harsh world they inhabited, trust was rare and precious. Tonight, in the stillness, it had been born. And for a fleeting moment, beneath the cold northern skies, that was enough. The morning light crept cautiously over Ravenholm, its pale fingers stretching across the village rooftops as if hesitant to disturb the fragile stillness that clung to the air like a thin veil. News traveled on whispering tongues, slipping through the cracks of doors and beneath the worn wooden shutters. The boy, Sven, was missing from the ritual clearing. Some said he had vanished into the forest. Others whispered darker tales, accusing Leif Ragnarsson of harboring a child shunned by the gods themselves. The murmurs grew louder by the hour, twisting like smoke into the hearts of the village's people. Leif felt the weight of suspicion settle upon him, even before the first harsh words were spoken. The forge, once a sanctuary of steady rhythm and smoke, had become a stage where every glance held judgment, every murmur a threat.
Gunnar's broad shoulders were stooped heavier than usual, his amber eyes shadowed by worry as he worked the iron with less certainty than before. Even Eric, his steadfast friend, avoided meeting his gaze, the salt of the sea unable to wash away the growing tension. It began with the elders, their voices low but insistent as they summoned Leif to the great hall. The heavy wooden beams overhead seemed to groan under the weight of unspoken accusations as Thorvald's piercing blue eyes settled on the young blacksmith. The elder's voice, once a balm of wisdom, now cut sharp through the air. "Leif Ragnarsson, you have brought turmoil upon us," Thorvald said, his tone heavy with both disappointment and stern resolve. "To harbor Sven, a child of ill repute, during the sacred moon ritual is to invite the gods' wrath. You risk not only your own fate, but that of the entire village." Leif's jaw tightened, the fire of defiance flickering behind his green eyes. "Sven is but a child, left alone and afraid. What gods demand cruelty over compassion? I bear no shame for protecting him." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uneasily. The village was a place bound by tradition and rigid order. Breaking its rules was to risk exile, or worse. Leif was painfully aware of the fragile balance between mercy and survival in this harsh world. Thorvald's gaze hardened. Compassion must not blind us to duty. The ritual was pure, untouched by weakness or distraction. Your actions have fractured that purity. Leif stood taller, though every muscle ached beneath the weight of expectation and fear. The purity you speak of demands sacrifice, yes, but not of innocence abandoned. I will bear the consequences, but I will not abandon what is right. Outside the hall, the cold wind carried the voices of hunters returning from the forest, their faces stern, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Among them was Bjorn, a grizzled tracker, known for his loyalty to the village and his unforgiving nature. His arrival brought a new wave of pressure, the unyielding gaze of a man who saw threats where others saw only frightened children. Bjorn's voice, rough and uncompromising, cut through the growing crowd. If a child is hidden within these walls, it is a threat to all. The forest is no place for the weak, the wild spares none. Harboring Svend invites the darkness to Ravnholm. Leif met Bjorn's glare without flinching. The darkness you speak of lives in the hearts of those who abandon their own. Svend is no threat, but a soul in need. The tension thickened, the air charged with the unspoken conflict between the old ways and the flickering hope of change. Families gathered in clusters, debating in hushed tones whether mercy was folly or strength. Mothers clutched their children closer, whispering fears of gods angered and futures uncertain. As the day wore on, word reached Olaf Punyo de Ferro, the jarl of the neighboring village and father of the cruel Hakon Olafsson. The news of Leif's defiance spread like wildfire along the rugged coastlines and dense forests between their peoples. Olaf's expression, cold and calculating, was unreadable as his men rode hard toward Ravnholm, their horses pounding against the earth like thunder. The arrival of Olaf's contingent was a shadow over the village, a reminder that alliances were delicate and honor demanded recompense. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces pale beneath the gray sky, as Olaf dismounted, his presence commanding and immovable. His eyes, gray as stone, swept over the crowd before settling on Leif. Leif Ragnarsson, Olaf's voice resonated, deep and unyielding. Word has reached my ears of your insolence. To harbor a child deemed cursed during the sacred ritual is to dishonor not only your own village, but the peace we hold between our clans. Leif swallowed hard, the knot of fear tightening in his chest. I have done no dishonor. Svend is innocent. Olaf's lips curled into a thin, contemptuous line. Innocence is a fragile thing, young blacksmith. It means little when weighed against tradition and the will of the gods. This is not your choice to make. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a chorus of unease, the fragile peace threatening to fracture beneath the looming threat of war and retribution. Olaf's men formed a silent ring around the square, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons, ready to enforce their jar's will. In the midst of the tension, Freya appeared at the edge of the crowd, her golden hair a beacon of light against the gathering storm. Her eyes, fierce and resolute, locked on to Leif's. Despite the distance, the unspoken bond between them was palpable, a shared defiance in a world bound by chains both seen and unseen. Father, Freya's voice rang clear, cutting through the growing chaos. The boy is no curse. To shun him is to turn away from the mercy our gods demand. We are bound not only by laws, but by the hearts of those we call kin. Thorvald's eyes flickered with uncertainty, the iron grip of tradition wavering before the earnest plea of his daughter. Olaf's gaze darkened, but a flicker of respect crossed his features. The hour stretched, fragile as the thin thread of light beneath the clouds. The village stood at a crossroads, the choice between rigid adherence to ancient customs and the uncertain path of compassion and change. Leif's heart thundered in his chest, the weight of all eyes upon him. In that moment he understood that the price of mercy was not just his own freedom, but the fragile future of all they held dear. The crowd's whispering ceased as Thorvald lifted his staff, the carved runes catching the dim light. His voice rang out, steady and resolute. Leif Ragnarsson will answer for his actions, but not with exile or death.
For 7 winters he shall serve the family of Olaf Panjo de Ferro, forging weapons and teaching the secrets of the runes. His freedom will be bound to theirs, a debt repaid through labor and loyalty. A heavy silence followed. The sentence was both punishment and salvation, a chain forged from duty and hope. Life met Freya's gaze, the glimmer of promise shining between them like a distant star. The path ahead was bleak, marked by sacrifice and separation, but it was a path chosen with open eyes and an unwavering heart. As Olaf nodded in acceptance, his men fell into formation, preparing to escort Leif from the village at dawn. The onlookers watched, some with sorrow, others with silent understanding. Outside the hall, Bjorn approached Leif, his fierce eyes softened briefly. "You carry a heavy burden, blacksmith, but sometimes the hardest forge makes the strongest blade." Leif nodded, the weight of those words settling deep within him. The fire of the forge would soon be replaced by the harsh cold of servitude, but his spirit burned fierce, fueled by the fragile hope of a love worth every sacrifice. As twilight bled into night, the village settled uneasily beneath the watchful gaze of the moon. The drums of ritual were silenced, but the echoes of defiance and hope lingered, a whisper upon the northern winds. Leif's hands trembled as he prepared for the journey that would test every fiber of his being. In his pocket, Freya's braid lay folded, a talisman of love and a promise unbroken. The world outside Ravnaholm was vast and unforgiving, but within Leif's heart a quiet flame endured. It was a flame that no chains could quench, no darkness could extinguish. For in the land of Vikings, where honor was carved in stone and blood, true strength was found not in conquest, but in the courage to stand for what the heart knew was right. And so, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Leif Ragnarsson stepped into the unknown. His fate entwined with love, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. The dawn's pale light crept hesitantly across the village of Ravnaholm, touching the rough-hewn timber walls and frost-kissed roofs with a brittle, cold glow. The air was thick with unease, a tension that pressed down on the shoulders of every villager, as if the very sky weighed heavy with the burden of what was to come. Whispers slithered through the narrow alleys and across the gathering square, voices low and urgent, carrying the weight of suspicion and fear. The boy Svend, once hidden in shadows, had become the spark, threatening to ignite old grudges and deep-seated fears within the community. Leif Ragnarsson stood at the edge of the square, his heart a roaring tempest beneath his calm exterior.
His hands, calloused from years at the forge, clenched and unclenched at his sides. The wolfskin cloak draped over his shoulders felt heavier than ever, a garment woven with memories of his father and the burdens of his own choices.
Behind him, Svend huddled close, a fragile presence amid the gathering storm. The crowd had assembled early, the villagers drawn not by celebration, but by the need to witness the reckoning. Elder Thorvald stood at the center, his imposing figure framed by the rising sun and the carved wooden pillars of the great hall. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over those present before settling on Leif with a fury barely restrained. At his side, Freya's presence was a stark contrast. Her pale face resolute, her blue eyes blazing with a fierce defiance that had never before surfaced so clearly. Hakon Olafsson was there too, his dark gaze fixed on Leif like a predator sizing up its prey. The scars etched across his sun-bronzed skin told stories of battles won and lives broken. But it was the cold, calculating glint in his eyes that chilled Leif more than any wound. Behind Hakon stood Olaf Punyotafero, his father, and the Jarl whose shadow loomed large over the region. His grey eyes were like stone, unyielding and absolute, as he observed the unfolding drama. The murmurs fell silent as Thorvald raised his staff, the ornate runes catching the light in a flicker of ancient power. Leif Ragnarsson, his voice boomed across the square. You stand accused of defiling the sacred trust of our people. His gaze sharpened, cutting through the morning stillness. You have harbored a child scorned by the gods during the ritual of the moon, risking the wrath of the deities and the ruin of our village. Leif met the elder's gaze without flinching, the fire of conviction burning through the exhaustion and uncertainty. Svend is no curse, he declared, voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. He is a child abandoned, deserving of mercy, not punishment. To cast him out is to turn away from the God's true will, the will for compassion. The crowd shifted uneasily, some faces hardening with distrust, others softening in quiet sympathy. Freya stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. Father, the gods are not blind to the heart. I say this, to reject the boy is to reject the mercy that binds us as kin. Leif speaks truth. Thorvald's eyes flickered with a brief conflicted hesitation, his grip tightening around the staff. Your words honor the gods, Freya, but the laws of our people are carved in stone as surely as the mountains that shelter us. His voice lowered, edged with the weight of tradition. Duty demands sacrifice. The ritual must remain pure. Hakon's voice cut through the tension like a sharpened blade. Purity is a lie if it shields weakness, elder. This boy's presence stains the ceremony and dishonors our alliance. If you cannot see that, then you betray not only your clan, but the strength that holds our people together. Olaf Punyotafero stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. The peace between our villages rests upon blood and honor. This transgression threatens that balance.
How will you, Thorvald, answer for the insult to my family? Thorvald's eyes narrowed, the weight of responsibility etched deep within his lined face. He turned toward Leif, his voice hard but measured. You have brought shame upon us all, blacksmith. But death or exile would only deepen the wounds. There is a price you must pay, one that honors both our laws and the mercy the gods demand. Leif held his breath, waiting for the elder's sentence, knowing that this moment would carve the path of his life for years to come. For 7 winters, Thorvald proclaimed, you shall bind yourself in service to Olaf Puño de Ferro's household. Your hands shall forge weapons and tools, your knowledge of runes shared with their smiths. In this you will repay the debt of your transgression, and restore the balance disturbed this night. A heavy silence followed, the weight of the sentence hanging in the air like the chill of a northern winter. Leif's heart thundered, the enormity of the sacrifice settling deep into his bones. 7 years away from Ravnholm, from Freya, from all he had known. A sentence that might as well be chains forged in iron. Olaf's gaze flicked to his son, the simmering rage in Hakon's eyes barely contained. This is our answer, Olaf declared. Let it stand. Hakon snarled, stepping forward with fury burning in his gaze. You would let this insolent boy walk free to mock us all? I will not see my family dishonored. Freya moved swiftly between them, her voice sharp as a blade. Enough, Hakon. This is the will of the elder and the gods. Your anger serves only to deepen the wounds. Hakon's jaw clenched, but he stepped back, the fire in his eyes dimming to a grudging acceptance. The crowd watched, breaths held, as the fragile order re-established itself amid the undercurrents of tension. Leif lowered his gaze, the weight of the moment pressing hard. His voice was low but resolute. I accept this fate. I will serve as bound, but my heart remains free. Freya approached him, stepping close enough for only the 2 of them to hear. Her hand trembled as she slipped a small braided lock of her golden hair into his palm, tied with a blue ribbon, a token of hope, of promise. 7 winters, she whispered, and we shall be together again. I will wait. Leif's fingers closed over the braid, the softness of it a stark contrast to the cold stone beneath his feet. I will return to you, he vowed, voice thick with emotion. No chain, no distance, no winter can break what we share. The murmurs of the crowd grew again as Olaf's men formed a silent escort around Leif, preparing to lead him away. The weight of the moment settled on all, the fragile threads of love and duty intertwined like those runes carved deep into the blades Leif had forged. As he took the first step away from the village that had been his home, from the woman who held his heart, Leif felt the bitter sting of sacrifice tighten around him.
The road ahead would be long and unforgiving, but beneath the cold northern skies a flame endured, fierce and unyielding. In that flame burned the hope of freedom, the courage of love, and the unbroken spirit of a young Viking who dared to risk everything for what his heart knew was right. The long shadow of winter was beginning to recede, but the cold still lingered in the bones of Ravnholm. Leif's hands, once scarred and blistered from the forge, now bore new marks, not from hammer or anvil, but from the harsh labor demanded by his enforced servitude to Olaf Puño de Ferro's household. 7 winters had passed, each day a slow chisel carving away at his youth, at his dreams. Yet in the darkest hours, the small braided lock of Freya's golden hair tied with the blue ribbon remained clutched close to his heart, a beacon amidst the encroaching gloom. The seasons had shifted with a cruel steadiness, snow melting only to be swallowed again by frost, the sun weak and pale in the northern skies. Leif had grown leaner, his face weathered beyond his years, but in his green eyes still burned a quiet defiance, a refusal to be broken. The smithing hall of Olaf's estate, vast and cold, had become a crucible of endurance.
Here, among the clang of hammers and the hiss of quenching steel, Leif forged not only blades, but also the fragile threads of survival and hope. But the years had not dulled the ache of separation. Freya's image haunted him, the gentle curve of her cheek, the deep blue of her eyes reflecting the fjord's endless sky. Each night when the forge's fire dimmed and the world grew silent, Leif traced those memories as if they were runes etched deep into his soul. She was the promise that no chain, no hardship could sever. Meanwhile, in Ravnaholm, the village had weathered its own storms. Freya, now a young woman marked by both sorrow and resolve, had grown in stature and spirit. The weight of her father's decisions had settled heavily on her shoulders, yet she remained a beacon of quiet strength among her people. The scars left by the turmoil of years past had not faded, but the fire in her heart endured. On a gray morning thick with the scent of melting snow and damp earth, word reached the village that a child, Svend, once hidden in shadows and fear, had grown strong under Leif's protection. Tales filtered through, whispers of how the boy's courage had saved a neighboring village from a sudden wolf attack, his quick thinking and fierce spirit earning grudges a softening glance. The fragile hope that had been planted in the cold soil of fear was beginning to sprout. With this news, the atmosphere in Ravnaholm shifted. The elders, once rigid in their judgments, found themselves facing the undeniable truth that the boy they had scorned possessed a strength born not of bloodline or status, but of heart and spirit. Thorvald's gaze, once as cold as winter ice, softened when meeting Freya's steady eyes.
The daughter who had once defied him now stood as a testament to the possibility of change. One evening, the great hall was filled with the murmurs of a gathering few, elders, families, and those who had long held hope in their hearts. The flickering light of the hearth cast dancing shadows on faces lined with age and trials. Thorvald stood slow and measured before them, his voice low but carrying the weight of years. We have judged too harshly. We have allowed fear to blind us to the mercy the gods demand. The boy Svend, once cast aside, has proven his worth not through status but through deeds. His eyes found Freya's, and in that gaze lay a quiet acknowledgment of her courage. And Leif, though bound by fate and duty, has borne his burdens with honor. A silence followed, heavy but cleansing, as those gathered absorbed the elder's words. It was not a full forgiveness, not yet, but a step, a crack in the frozen walls of tradition. Far away, in the shadowed forge of Olaf's estate, Leif prepared for the day's work, his breath clouding in the crisp air. A sudden knock at the heavy wooden door startled him. The messenger who entered bore a seal from Ravnaholm, a summons from Elder Thorvald himself. The message was clear. After 7 winters, the time had come for Leif to return. The news flickered within Leif's chest like a newly kindled flame. Freedom was near, but with it came uncertainty. Would the village welcome him as a son returned, or would the scars of the past still mark him as an outcast? Most importantly, would Freya still be waiting, the promise of her braid a living bond across the years? The journey back was harsh, the winter roads slick and treacherous beneath heavy boots and hardened horses. But each step brought Leif closer to the place where his heart had always dwelled. The familiar scent of pine, the distant calls of ravens, the cold breath of the fjord, all stirred memories that no servitude could erase. Upon entering the village, Leif was met with a silence charged with anticipation. Faces turned toward him, some wary, others filled with cautious hope. The forge's familiar smoke curled into the sky, a sign of life and endurance.
At the edge of the crowd stood Freya, no longer the girl adorned with wildflowers, but a woman whose gaze carried the weight of years and the fierce light of love survived. Their eyes met, and in that moment the years of separation dissolved. No words were needed, only the unspoken truth carried in their shared glance. Freya stepped forward, her hand reaching out to him, fingers trembling slightly as she placed the braided lock of hair into his palm once again. "You have returned," she said softly, voice steady despite the torrent beneath. Leif's voice was hoarse, thick with emotion. "Nor mine. No winter could freeze what burns between us."
The crowd watched, some with smiles breaking through years of doubt, others with silent tears glistening beneath the cold light. Elder Thorvald approached slowly, his face softened by time and reflection. "Leif," he said, voice quieter than before but no less commanding, "you have paid the price set before you. You have honored your word and the gods through your toil and patience." Turning to Freya, he added, "And you, daughter, have shown the strength to speak for what is right, to challenge the old ways with courage." The village seemed to breathe in unison, the tension thawing like ice beneath the spring sun. The old grudges and fears did not vanish, but they were tempered by the promise of a new dawn. In the days that followed, Leif was welcomed back not just as a servant returned, but as a man who had endured, who had fought not with sword alone, but with heart and unyielding spirit. The bond between him and Freya became a symbol, a fragile but unbreakable link between past and future, love and duty. Svend, too, found his place among the people, no longer the outcast, but a young man whose courage had rewritten the stories whispered in shadow. And so, beneath the vast northern sky, where gods were both watchful and distant, a fragile peace settled over Ravnamholm. The fires of the forge burned brighter, not just as a source of metal and blade, but as a beacon of hope, of redemption earned through sacrifice, and the fierce conviction that even in the harshest of worlds, love and mercy could endure. Leif stood beside Freya one evening as the sun dipped low behind the fjord's jagged peaks, the cold wind carrying the scent of pine and salt. Their fingers entwined, the braid of golden hair resting warm in his palm, a symbol that, no matter the trials, no matter the years torn apart by fate, some bonds could never be broken. In that moment, beneath the quiet watch of the gods, the young blacksmith who had once paid with his freedom now held something far greater, a future forged not in chains, but in love and the strength to claim it. The village of Ravnamholm breathed with a quiet resilience that seemed almost new, as if the long, harsh winters had finally begun to thaw not only the earth beneath their feet, but the hearts of its people. The once rigid lines that separated friend from foe, tradition from change, had softened like the edges of a worn axe blade, shaped by time and tempered by sacrifice. Leif Ragnarsson's return had rippled through the village like the first crack of spring ice breaking free from a frozen fjord. No longer the boy bound by servitude to a distant lord, he stepped forward as a man forged by hardship, carrying with him the stories of 7 winters lived far from home, stories etched in scars and sweat, but also in quiet hope. His hands, still calloused from the forge, now wielded a different kind of strength, one born of endurance, loyalty, and an unyielding love. The forge itself had become a sanctuary once more. Where before the clang of hammer on anvil had echoed the tension between old and new, now it sang a softer song, a melody of reconciliation.
Gunnar, the grizzled smith who had once mentored Leif in his youth, had returned from a journey to gather rare ores, and upon hearing of Leif's homecoming, had prepared the workshop to welcome him back. The old man's eyes, once clouded by worry, now glinted with a spark of pride, reflecting the warm glow of the fire that never quite seemed to die. In the village square, the people moved with a gentle purpose. Children who had once whispered of curses and omens now played freely alongside Sven, the boy who had been cast aside but had emerged as a symbol of courage and resilience. Sven's small frame had filled with strength over the years, molded by the kindness and protection Leif had given him. The scars that once marked him as an outcast had faded beneath layers of confidence and the steady support of a community slowly learning to embrace the unexpected threads woven into their tapestry. Elder Thorvald, the once stern and unyielding guardian of tradition, had softened with the passing seasons. The weight of leadership had not lessened, but the edges of his resolve had been shaped by the undeniable truth that mercy and compassion were not signs of weakness, but of enduring wisdom. His gaze, once as cold and sharp as the northern winds, now carried a hint of warmth when it rested upon Freya, the daughter who had defied both father and fate, embodying the fierce spirit that had challenged the rigidity of their customs and breathed new life into their world. Freya herself had blossomed into a woman whose strength was mirrored not only in her quiet dignity, but also in the fierce flame of conviction that burned behind her clear blue eyes. The burden of her father's decisions had weighed heavily on her, but she wore it now as a mantle of responsibility and hope. In her hands rested not only the legacy of her lineage, but the promise of a future where love and choice could coexist without sacrifice of honor. The bond between Leif and Freya had become a living testament to the power of love to transcend the harshest divides. Their reunion had been quiet but profound, a moment that rippled outward to touch the lives of those around them. The small braid of golden hair, once a secret token tied with a simple blue ribbon, had become a symbol of enduring faith and promise, carried in the heart of a man who had endured exile and hardship for the chance to return. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks of the fjord, casting long shadows that danced upon the snow-melted earth, Leif and Freya could often be found standing side by side at the edge of the village. Their hands intertwined, their breaths visible in the crisp air, they shared quiet moments of reflection and hope. The world around them was still marked by scars, old wounds of conflict and fear, but the promise of renewal glimmered in the soft light of stars and the flickering flames of hearth fires. The rituals of the village, once strict and unyielding, had begun to bend beneath the weight of new understanding. The sacred moon ceremony, which had once been a stage for rigid adherence to tradition, now held space for whispered prayers of mercy alongside the ancient rites. The young women who danced beneath the silver light carried garlands of wildflowers woven alongside herbs of healing, and the offerings made to the gods included not only strength and fertility, but also gratitude for the courage to change. Sven, no longer a frightened child, but a young man tempered by trials, had found his place among the people of Ravenholm. His deeds, small acts of bravery and kindness, had slowly chipped away at the walls of suspicion that once surrounded him. Now his laughter mingled with that of other children near the edges of the forest, his presence a quiet reminder that the strength of a village was measured not by bloodlines or birthrights, but by the bonds forged in empathy and shared struggle. Even Bjorn, the fierce tracker, who had once spoken harshly of weakness and danger, had come to see the value in compassion. His voice, once like the crack of a whip, softened over time, and he found himself standing guard not only over the village's borders, but over the fragile trust that now linked its people. Olaf Puño de Ferro's men, who had once marched with the weight of threat and punitive justice, now carried themselves with a tempered respect. The alliance between the villages, once threatened by the shadows of anger and pride, had begun to root in understanding and mutual respect. Olaf himself, a man whose presence had always loomed like a storm cloud, had learned the quiet lesson that honor and mercy were not opposing forces, but two sides of a coin. In quiet moments within the great hall, Thorvald would sometimes speak with Olaf in low tones, their conversations laced with the weight of hard-won wisdom. The old rivalries still lingered, but beneath them was the fragile groundwork of peace, one built on the recognition that the future demanded more than strength in arms, it demanded strength of heart. As the seasons turned once more, the village prepared not only for the cycles of sowing and harvest, but for a new era in which the stories told by the fireside would include tales not just of battles won or lost, but of love's endurance, of compassion's quiet power, and the sacrifices that shaped the soul of a people. Leif's forge became a place where the old runes were not only carved into weapons, but also into amulets and tokens of protection for those who sought both strength and mercy.
His knowledge, once a closely guarded secret passed down from his grandfather, now became a bridge, shared openly with young smiths eager to learn, eager to craft tools not just for war, but for the livelihood and healing of the village. Freya, too, found her voice growing stronger, not just as the elder's daughter, but as a leader among the women of Ravnholm. She gathered those who sought to learn the old ways alongside the new, teaching the meanings behind the runes, the stories of the gods, and the importance of choice. Her presence was a beacon, a living contradiction to the rigid roles assigned by birth, showing that strength could be gentle and power could be humble. In the quiet of night, when the stars wheeled above the fjord's dark waters, Leif would often find himself gazing at the small braided lock of hair he still kept close, a talisman not only of love, but of survival. Each thread seemed woven with memories of battles fought within and without, of days spent in exile and nights filled with longing. But more than that, it was a reminder of what was worth enduring, what was worth sacrificing everything for. The chance to shape one's own destiny, to forge a life not bound by chains, but by hope. The story of Leif and Freya, once whispered in secret shadows beneath the moon's pale light, had grown into a legend spoken aloud by the firesides of Ravnholm. It was a story of defiance and devotion, of a young blacksmith who dared to challenge the unyielding will of tradition, and a daughter of the elder who found the courage to stand beside him. Their legacy was not merely in the blades forged or the runes carved into stone, but in the hearts they touched, the fragile hope that even in a world as harsh as the northern wilds, love could bloom, unbroken and fierce. As the village settled into the gentle rhythm of a new age, where the old gods watched silently from the shadows and the winds carried whispers of change, Leif and Freya stood at the edge of a future yet unwritten. Together, they faced the cold northern skies, not as prisoners of fate, but as architects of their own story, bound not by duty alone, but by the unyielding strength of a love that had paid its price and earned its freedom. And beneath the vast expanse of stars, where the ancient runes told tales of gods and men, the forge's flame burned steady, a quiet beacon against the darkness, lighting the way for those who would come after, carrying forward a legacy forged in sacrifice, honor, and the enduring power of the human heart.
The fire in the forge had long since died down, leaving behind only the faint glow of smoldering embers as the village of Ravenholm settled into a quiet night. The stars above stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the tides of fate that had swept through the lives of those who dwelled beneath their cold light. As the village settled into the gentle rhythm of a new age, where the old gods watched silently from the shadows, and the winds carried whispers of change, Leif and Freya stood at the edge of a future yet unwritten. Together they faced the cold northern skies, not as prisoners of fate, but as architects of their own story, bound not by duty alone, but by the unyielding strength of a love that had paid its price and earned its freedom. And beneath the vast expanse of stars, where the ancient runes told tales of gods and men, the forge's flame burned steady, a quiet beacon against the darkness, lighting the way for those who would come after, carrying forward a legacy forged in sacrifice, honor, and the enduring power of the human heart. The fire in the forge had long since died down, leaving behind only the faint glow of smoldering embers as the village of Ravenholm settled into a quiet night. The stars above stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to the tides of fate that had swept through the lives of those who dwelled beneath their cold light.
Leif stood near the doorway of the simple wooden building, the familiar scent of smoke and iron clinging to his clothes as he gazed out into the gathering darkness. The weight of 7 winters spent in servitude pressed upon him still, but it was tempered now by the fierce flame of hope that burned steadily within. In the stillness, his thoughts turned to the journey that had led him here, a path carved out of sacrifice, struggle, and the quiet defiance of a young man who refused to bow to the unyielding chains of tradition. Each year spent away from Ravenholm had been a test, every day marked by labor and longing. Yet through it all, the small braid of golden hair, tied with a blue ribbon and kept close to his heart, had been a tether to the promise that had sustained him, a promise made beneath the cold northern skies to the woman whose memory no distance nor time could diminish. Freya's face came to him then, clear and bright, her eyes filled with a resolve that mirrored his own. She had stood tall before the elders and the crowd, her voice unwavering as she spoke truths that challenged the very foundations of their world. It was her courage that had sparked the first flicker of change, her defiance that had cracked the frozen walls of rigid custom. She had not merely waited for him, she had fought beside him in the invisible battles waged within the hearts of their people. Life's gaze drifted upward, where the moon hung high and full, casting silver light on the quiet village below. The memory of that night, the ritual, the stolen moments by the creek, the kiss that had sealed their fate, surged anew. It was a night of both innocence and reckoning, when love dared to bloom despite the shadow of fear and duty. The price they had paid was harsh, but it had forged something stronger than chains, a bond unbroken by time or hardship. Around him the village breathed softly, the echoes of old songs fading into the whispers of wind through pine branches. The ancient runes carved into blades and stones seemed to pulse with a new meaning, one not solely of power or protection, but of mercy, courage, and the capacity to change. In this place where gods and men intertwined, where honor was carved deep into flesh and stone, Leif understood that true strength was as much about the heart as the sword. His thoughts drifted to Svend, the boy once cast aside, now a young man shaped by kindness and resilience. The fragile thread of trust woven between them had blossomed into a testament of hope, a quiet rebellion against the cruelty that had sought to claim him.
Through Svend, Leif saw the future, the possibility that a village could grow beyond fear, that mercy could become as revered as valor. Freya's hand brushed against his arm, pulling him gently from his reverie. Her gaze held his, steady and warm, the light of the forge reflected in her eyes.
Without words, they shared the understanding that had carried them through years of separation and hardship. That love, in its purest form, was a force that demanded sacrifice, but promised freedom. The cold wind whispered through the village, carrying the scent of pine and earth, the distant murmur of the fjord's waves mingling with the night. Leif tightened his grip on the small braid in his hand, a talisman of the past and a beacon for the future. The road ahead was uncertain, as it always was in a world ruled by gods and men, by fate and choice. But for the first time in many winters, it was a path walked not in chains, but in courage. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Leif turned back toward the forge. The flames waiting to be kindled would soon crackle to life once more, casting warmth into the cold morning and illuminating the faces of a village slowly learning to embrace change. Here, beneath the endless sky, the story of love and sacrifice would continue, woven into the very fabric of the land, whispered in the wind, and etched into the hearts of those who dared to hope. In the end, it was not the strength of arms, nor the power of tradition, but the courage to stand for what the heart knew was right. And as the night gave way to day, the fierce light of that courage burned brighter than any blade. If this story stirred something within you, if the fires of sacrifice and love have kindled a spark, join us again as we delve deeper into the lives shaped beneath the northern skies. The tales are many, and in each one a truth waits to be unearthed. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stand with us by the forge, where stories of honor, struggle, and the human spirit are never extinguished. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started, and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.